So feel free to interrupt me if I'm not making sense, but this is kind of what we've already been talking about, right? So an argument is very simply a claim of fact, policy, or opinion about something that is supported with evidence. So, we sometimes say I argued with someone, but if you were just yelling at each other, "You're stupid, no, you're stupid," then you actually weren't arguing because there was no one using any evidence or facts. Now, if you instead said, "You're stupid because you said this," then that you've used some evidence, right? You quoted them. A rebuttal is it's talking back to someone else's argument, right? It's refuting or arguing back to someone else's argument. And we often do this in a counterclaim, right? So we anticipate the counterclaim, what somebody else would say to our claim, and we use this to talk back to the counterclaim. And then rhetoric is all the stylistic stuff that authors use. It's ethos, pathos, and logos, which we studied, and it's also all the different things like repetition and rhetorical questions, all the things that we notice that people do to try and help their argument be more clear is called rhetoric. So it's all the tools of writing. So it's the tools of argument writing. So anything that makes sense to you, jot that down. It doesn't have to be all perfect. And then there's a video here that we're going to watch, and we're going to be looking at the Cyclops as an example of a monster, right? He's one of the earliest monsters in history. He's the one-eyed monster right here. And we're going to see what we learn about him from this video and help us visualize who Homer argues was the scariest monster in his society, right? So let's learn what we can from this video. Let me know if you can't hear it or if there's any issue with the sound quality. You have access to the same video though.
The people of this nation have spoken.
The story of America's next president.
Joe Biden has been defined in public life by heartbreak and empathy.
This man who's wanted to be president for half a century and failed and now finds himself at this moment of really abject national crisis. That's when the country sees him for the first time.
It will test every bit of what Joe Biden has learned over nearly 50 years in public office.
Tune in or stream starting January 19th, 9 Central, only on PBS.
The one-eyed giant you know and love has dominated popular imagination for thousands of years. The Cyclops combines two monstrous elements into one, a humanoid of massive stature and a physical malformation that only rarely occurs in real life. The most famous Cyclops, the cannibalistic shepherd of the ancient Greek Homeric myth, isn't the only one. He's one of many that turn up not just in Greek mythology, but in other cultures throughout the world. So why is this? Why a one-eyed monster in the first place? Does paleontology play a part in this? To help us out, we asked our friends from Eons for some insight into the possible origins of this giant, who, did I mention, only has one eye? I'm Dr. Emily Zarka, and this is Monstrum. The Cyclops is not a singular creature that always looks the same or comes from the same place. The word means round eye and can apply to all kinds of monsters. Chances are the one you've encountered is some variation from Homer's famous text, the Odyssey. The hero Odysseus and his men sail to the land of the Cyclops, an island home to a people described as arrogant, lawless folk. While exploring the island, they find a remote cave and see a monstrous man named Polyphemus living apart from the others, tending to his large flock of sheep. In ancient Greece, only primeval or faraway peoples were attributed to living in caves, so those hearing this tale would know straight away that Odysseus was about to encounter something very different from the sophisticated Greeks. While Polyphemus is away, they secretly enter the monster's cave and help themselves to the giant's food while waiting for him to return. When the immense shepherd finally arrives, he seals the door with a huge stone before spotting the humans. When questioning how they arrived to his land, Odysseus lies and tells the creature their ship crashed. In a sudden wild fit of rage, Polyphemus snatches 2 of the men, violently throwing their bodies to the ground before cutting them limb from limb. While the others watch on in horror, he eats them raw. Odysseus and his friends are understandably horrified and begin plotting their escape while the giant sleeps. More men are eaten the next day, but Odysseus manages to sharpen a large stake from the giant's own massive club and begins to execute his master plan of getting Polyphemus drunk. With the wine in full effect, the buzzed giant asks his drinking buddy's name. Odysseus responds with Nomen. While the giant is asleep, Odysseus and 4 men hold the stake in a fire until it glows red hot. They thrust this into his eye, blinding the giant. When the other Cyclops on the island hear his cries of agony and rush to come see what's wrong, the injured Polyphemus can only say he was hurt by no man. The next morning, the now blind giant opens his cave to graze his sheep, and Odysseus and his men escape, clinging beneath the bellies of the woolly animals. As the crew sails away, with some of the giant sheep in tow, I might add, Polyphemus hurls massive rocks at the boat when Odysseus taunts him. Legend has it, you can even see these rocks today. The unique formation of the Ferraioni of Acitrezza are called the Islands of the Cyclops. Okay, I have to say it, I just have to say it, Odysseus is actually a huge I mean, the dude goes to this guy's home, eats his cheese, steals his pets, and blinds him. He's a terrible guest to have. I wouldn't want to have him at my party. Despite the popularity of this story, Homer never actually says Polyphemus or any of the other Cyclops have only one eye. It's only assumed from other events of the story, which might be why a lot of art from ancient Greece takes some artistic liberties and shows the enormous figure with 1, 2, and even 3 eyes. But there is another Greek myth with creatures also named Cyclops, who are specifically described as only having one eye. So that author clearly stole from Homer, right? Well, not exactly. Scholars still argue today about which text came first. In his Theogony, written around the same time as Homer, famous Greek poet Hesiod tells of a trio of smiths. These 3 brothers were said to be born from the union of the gods Gaia and Oranos, each with a single eye in the middle of their foreheads. They are called Cyclops after their appearance. Each brother is given their own name, and in Greek they translate to thunder, lightning, and flash. These one-eyed children of gods gifted Zeus with his thunderbolt, much more sophisticated and powerful than the simple, violent shepherds of Homer's story. Hesiod details that strength and might and craft were in their works. The Cyclops here are portrayed as blacksmiths, and according to one ancient Greek historian, they are even credited with the invention of bronze weapons. Let's think about this association for a second. The ability to forge iron, the job of a blacksmith, requires immense physical strength. It's not really hard to see how such figures would be considered giants in mythology. Smiths were important in antiquity, but they were often seen as outsiders, given that they did not labor in the fields or hunt like most other people of the time. And if you've watched an episode of this show before, you'll know by now, marginality often equals monstrosity. So whichever story came first, we have 2 Greek traditions of the Cyclops. One is a society of sheep-herding giants, and the other as one-eyed children of gods. But why giants with only one eye in the first place? Well, there's a pretty popular theory involving skull fossils. Now, I'm definitely not a paleontology expert, but luckily for me, I do know a few cool ones. Blake, could dinosaur bones help explain the Cyclops myths?
Now, according to an Austrian paleontologist named Othenio Abel, it was elephant fossils, not dinosaur bones, that inspired the original Cyclops myths. Elephants and their relatives belong to a group known as the Proboscideans. And while these amazing animals don't live in southern Europe today, they show up a lot in the fossil record of the Mediterranean. One of the first species to arrive in Europe was Gomphotherium, a bizarre mammal with tusks on both its upper and lower jaws. Scientists think Gomphotherium made it to Europe about 18.5 million years ago, and its remains have been found in Spain and Turkey. And it wasn't the last of its kind to roam the Mediterranean coasts. Mammoths, mastodons, extinct elephants, and a behemoth named Dinotherium lived there too. Dinotherium, whose name means terrible beast, had downward curving tusks anchored to its chin. And did I mention that it was big, like really super duper big? A full-grown Dinotherium stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder and may have tipped the scales at 12 metric tons, making it twice as heavy as a modern African elephant.
But these ancient proboscideans weren't always giants. On Cyprus, Crete, and many other Mediterranean islands, paleontologists have found remains of dwarf elephants. And Sardinia, an island near eastern Italy, once even had miniature mammoths. And of these smaller proboscideans, among the very smallest was Paleoloxodon falconeri, standing no more than 1.2 meters tall. And much like Odysseus' Cyclops, its remains are often found inside of caves on Sicily and Malta. In fact, Spinagallo Cave in southwestern Sicily has yielded over 2,000 dwarf elephant bones to date. So what explains these shrunken giants? Well, in biology, there's a concept called Foster's rule. In a nutshell, it states that on isolated islands, the descendants of small mammals, like rats, frequently get larger, especially if there's a lack of predators. And the reverse is often true too. When big-bodied mammals like elephants populate an island, natural selection can favor smaller body sizes because there are fewer resources. Big or small though, a proboscidean skeleton might look downright bizarre to anybody who's never seen a live elephant. In 1914, Othniel Abel proposed that when the ancient Greeks came across these fossils, they mistook them for the remains of one-eyed humanoid giants. The reason for the misunderstanding, he said, was the one feature that most proboscideans share, the large nasal cavity high up on the forehead. Abel reasoned that if you saw an elephant skull and had no idea what its owner looked like, you might not know that this hole had once been connected to a fleshy trunk. Instead, you might think it was a single extra-large eye socket in the middle of the animal's face. Sound familiar?
While giants are present in the myths of almost all ancient civilizations, Homer's version has dominated in the modern period. Variants of the Homeric Cyclops have been found in France, Turkey, and Estonia, among other places. And there's even a version in a famous collection of Arabian folktales, 1001 Nights. In the 16th century, a Turkish manuscript showed the myth existed outside of Greece. In this version, a Cyclops-like figure demands to be fed 2 people and 500 sheep a day. He is ultimately defeated with a spit to the eye, and the hero escapes under the skin of a ram. Later in the 19th century, Wilhelm Grimm, yes, he's one of those brothers, published a book collecting 10 folkloric versions of the blinded ogre story. Grimm is widely considered the first folklorist to investigate the various global versions of Homos polyphemus. In the book, he states that all versions of the myth had ancient origins. Maybe those fossils we were talking about? In 1904, German scholar Oskar Hackmann published a collection of 221 versions of the blinding of the ogre myth, taken from 25 different nations. Take that, Brother Grimm. The number has only expanded since then. We still see the Greek versions of the Cyclops myth appearing in literature class and a few popular instances. Wrath of the Titans, Disney's Hercules, Percy Jackson,
Hi, brother.
and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And today, the figure has evolved into lovable monsters, mutant aliens, and the famous X-Men character, Cyclops. You may have heard of him. Despite these examples, overall, the image of the one-eyed giant as a monster has largely faded. If you take a look at modern visual depictions of Cyclops, they aren't really scary. Even the violent cannibals of ancient mythology seem laughable now, in part because they are often shown as being oafish, gullible, and, well, easy to defeat. All you need is a simple plan and a pointy stick. That doesn't exactly inspire terror. But that doesn't mean the stories about them are any less significant. They show us how modern paleontology can sometimes help explain the beliefs of the past and give us a unique insight into ancient cultures.
Fascinating. I hope you're also fascinated. I am fascinated by that. All right, because I know some folks showed up late and maybe don't have the link. If you're not in the Google Classroom yet, we're experimenting this trimester with Google Classroom because basically 2 things. I like it better because I can see into your work here. See, I see everybody's assignment and I can see what you're writing. So get in there and start writing so I can see it. All right. If you're not in yet, get in. If you need help, chat me up or talk, and let's make sure you've gotten into your Google document that looks like this so that you have a place to take notes about what you saw in that video. Because I saw some stuff. What is one thing that you personally learned from that video? If you want to write in the chat or you want to share out loud one thing you learned from the video, I'll write it down here, or you can write it on your Google Doc. And here's the trick on this. You put your cursor up in this box and it will write down here. It's stupid. I'm not sure why the formatting is like that. I didn't make this, but I do really like the curriculum and I don't feel like reinventing wheels. So that's the trick to how to put your words in there if you were struggling, right? Is you put your cursor up here in this box and then you go down here. So I learned that there are fossils of old elephant-like creatures on the Now you may absolutely steal my answer, but I'm also going to know it's my answer. So add something else. I'm sure there's something else that you learned too. I'm going to pause the recording, check on your guys' work, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next bit. Work on this for now. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go over that again because I didn't do it on the video. And somebody will be watching this later and wondering what on earth I am supposed to do. So we're going to close read this excerpt from Homer's The Odyssey. And the first look is we're going to look, according to Homer, a monster is a being who looks like. So we're looking for details of what this monster looks like on the first reading. We're going to read it twice. Excerpt from In the One-Eyed Giant's Cave. The hearts inside us shook, terrified by his rumbling voice and monstrous hulk. And I think those are details worth highlighting. Nevertheless, I found the nerve to answer firmly, Men of Acnea, we are bound now from Troy. Stranger, he grumbled back from his brutal heart, you must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere telling me to fear the gods or avoid their wrath. Lurching up, he lunged out with his hands toward my men, and snatching two at once, rapping them on the ground. He knocked them like dead pups. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked the floor, and ripping them limb from limb to fix his meal. He bolted them down like a mountain lion, left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh and bones, marrow and all. We flung our arms to Zeus. We wept and cried aloud, looking on at his grisly work, paralyzed, appalled. But once the Cyclops had stuffed his enormous gut with human flesh, there's another detail about his look, washing it down with raw milk, he slept in his cage, stretched out along his flocks. All right, and so there's another kind of visual image of him laying down with his sheep. And I, with my fighting heart, I thought at first to steal up to him, draw the sharp sword at my hip and stab his chest, where the midriff packs the liver. I groped for the fatal spot, but a fresh thought held me back. There, at a stroke, we'd finish off ourselves as well. How could we, without bare hands, heave back that slab he set to block his cavern's gaping maw? So we lay there waiting, groaning, waiting dawn. All right. Do I have any other details? Did I miss any about his look? Interrupt me if you see any that I didn't see. All right, and what I notice is he has a rumbling voice. Spell it right. He has a monstrous hulk, and actually I don't even need to copy and paste those things. I don't have to worry about he has enormous gut. Right, so one of the things is monsters are large, right? He's got this monster as being really large and also strong, so that, this isn't a visual detail necessarily, but it is letting us know that he's super strong. The men there couldn't move the boulder that he moved without him, so he's super strong. All right, we're going to read it a second time, and this time we're going to look for who he acts like, and I'm going to put this in a different color. I'll put this in blue, right? So I put the looks like in yellow and the acts like in blue, and that's just a way for me to tell the difference. The cool thing about Google Docs is you have all the highlighter colors. In fact, you can even make custom colors if you get bored and you want to get really inventive, So as you wish, you can have fun. We'll read it again, looking for how a monster acts. The hearts inside us shook, terrified by his rumbling voice and monstrous hulk. Nevertheless, I found the nerve to answer firmly, "Men of Acnea, we are bound now from Troy." "Stranger," he grumbled back from his brutal heart, "you must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere, telling me to fear the gods and avoid their wrath." This is his behavior. He's defiant in his words. Lurching up, he lunged out with his hands toward my men, snatching two at once. All right, so he's strong enough to pick up two men at once, wrapping them on the ground. And he knocked them dead like pups. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked the floor, and ripping them limb from limb to fix his meal. He bolted them down like a mountain lion, so he ate them. Left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh, and bones, marrow, and all. So he ate two men completely. All of them, which is really just disgusting, right? He flung our arms to Zeus. We wept and cried aloud, looking at his grisly work, paralyzed, appalled. But once the Cyclops had stuffed his enormous gut with human flesh, washing it down with raw milk, he slept in his cave, stretched out along his flocks, which is both a visual and an action, right? So he's stretched out with his flocks in the cave. And I, with my fighting heart, I thought at first to steal up to him, draw the sharp sword at my hip, and stab his chest where the midriff packs the liver. I groped for the fatal spot, but with a fresh thought held me back. There, at a stroke, we'd finish off ourselves as well. How could we, without bare hands, heave back the slab that set to block his cavern's gaping maw? So we lay there groaning, waiting for dawn. Okay, he picked up two men at a time, killed them by throwing them on the ground, and ate them. Then he fell asleep. All right. So, what is it about monsters? We're going to keep thinking about this topic. Hopefully you finished this assignment. If you finish it, you're going to go back and make sure you've also finished any other of the project development assignments that we've had. Specifically, all these, I'm right because I'm using Rhetoric. This is all leading up to the project that is here. If you want a headline and look at that, please do take a look at what we're expecting. If you missed project number 1, you didn't do the first marking period project, you may still do it and turn it in. I've only graded 1 so far on this platform. There's also the iLearn platform. And I'm here for another 15 minutes to answer questions. And I'm going to stop my share. And just let me know if you need anything. I'm here.